I'm sure we have all seen images like this on TVs, along with similar words that serve to grab our attention. Since we see these headlines and images almost daily, it might seem like the current immigration situation is unprecedented and dire. And immigration has become one of the most polarizing issues in America today. While this situation is incredibly chaotic, as is evident from the picture, and we should definitely work to amend our current immigration protocols. These issues are not what we are going to discuss today. I'm sure that with the chaos that currently surrounds this situation, many of you would be shocked if I told you. This isn't new, because it isn't, and behind today's headlines lies a story stretching back centuries, a story of fear, exclusion, and eventually, reluctant acceptance. In this video, we will delve into the history behind immigration in the US and how it has been perceived by the people already living in the US during these periods. Every generation thinks it's facing something new. Every generation forgets the past. Like most issues, to understand how we arrived at our current situation, we must understand the events and actions that came before. We will begin the examination of the history of immigration in America, starting before the United States was even a country. As the first English colonies began to be settled along the eastern seaboard, the idea of an American was simple: white, Protestant, and British. Anyone outside that mold was a threat. Catholics, German Lutherans, and even French Huguenots were met with suspicion and hostility. For example, in most English colonies early on, besides for Maryland, which was originally set up as a Catholic colony, Catholicism was banned or heavily restricted. The Massachusetts colony had laws forbidding the practice of Catholicism, with punishments including fines, imprisonment, or even banishment. And even in Maryland, which was founded as a haven for English Catholics, tensions grew as Protestants became the majority. This eventually led to the repeal of the Toleration Act of 1649, which had protected Catholics. Just a quick tidbit about why Protestants looked down on Catholics is because they believed Catholics stayed loyal to foreign leaders like the Pope and the French King, which caused increased suspicion during conflicts like the French and Indian War. Even though early German Protestants shared the Protestant faith with the English Protestant majority, they were still looked at with suspicion. They faced discrimination since they spoke a different language and had different customs. The suspicions were exceptionally high during times when the German states were at war with England. And even though French Huguenots were almost Protestants who actually fled to the American colonies because of the persecution they faced from French Catholics in France. Like German Protestants, they were still viewed as different since they came from a country other than England, and they were often expected to abandon the French language and religious customs to integrate into English-speaking churches and society. They could face consequences, such as being denied land or church charters, if they didn't. So, as you can see, suspicions towards immigrants who didn't seem to fit the norm started in the US before the US was even a country. But on the plus side, these early discriminations that were faced by some earlier settlers were one of the motivating factors that led to the creation of the First Amendment in the Constitution. And over time, these groups' numbers grew and they integrated, they too became true Americans. So as these groups became true Americans, and these demographics became woven into the fabric of America, some of them also took on the mindset that demographics that immigrate to the US that aren't already part of this American fabric should be looked down and treated with suspicion just like they were at first. This is evident during the mass immigration of Irish, Italians, and other Eastern Europeans in the mid to late 1800s. In the 1800s, Irish immigrants fleeing famine began arriving in droves to the US. They were called lazy, drunkards, even subhuman, and Irish women were often portrayed as promiscuous or immoral, fueling further social exclusion. On top of this, social discrimination they faced, very few employers wanted to hire Irish people. In fact, no Irish need apply signs were common in job postings. This left Irish men often stuck in the lowest paying, most dangerous jobs like canal digging, railroads, sanitation, or as dock laborers, and Irish women often became domestic servants. The main reason Irish were discriminated against was because they were Catholic primarily, so people viewed them with the same suspicions as earlier Catholics. This distrust eventually led to anti-Catholic riots and church burnings like the Philadelphia Nativist riots in 1844. And there was even a political party formed out of a desire to exclude the Irish from politics and other areas of American life. This political party was called the Know Nothing Party. It was formed in the 1850s and was a major nativist movement that sought to restrict Irish political power, limit immigration, and promote native-born Protestant Americans. These thoughts led to things like Irish voters facing intimidation, and their Catholic schools were often under attack. Italians also faced severe discrimination when they came to the US. Like the Irish, they weren't initially viewed as white, and they were associated with anarchists and the mafia. Because of this, they were viewed as racially other, dirty, violent, and prone to crime. And they also faced anti-Catholic discrimination, and traditional Italian religious holidays like festivals, saints' days, were mocked or seen as un-American. Like the Irish, often could only get the lowest paying jobs, like jobs in factories, mines, as street vendors, and shoeshiners. Also, they were often hired as strikebreakers and used for cheap labor, pitting them against Irish and other groups. This only served to alienate Italians from other immigrant groups as well. These stereotypes and discriminations occasionally led to violence against Italians, including the largest mass lynching in U.S. history, which occurred in 1891 in New Orleans, when a mob murdered 11 Italians after they were falsely accused of killing a police chief. Over time, both the Irish and Italians fought for and gained social acceptance, largely by assimilating into white identity, entering politics, like JFK for the Irish and Mario Procaccino for the Italians, and distancing themselves from newer immigrant groups. But their stories are a powerful reminder that whiteness and Americanness were not fixed categories, and both were historically denied to people now seen as part of the American mainstream. Around the time of the mass migration of the Irish and Italians, there was also mass migrations of Eastern Europeans and Chinese. These groups faced similar hardships and discrimination. And it was often worse with the Chinese, who had to face extreme prejudice, which included dealing with social isolation from other ethnic groups, since they were often forced to live in segregated Chinatowns, meaning they faced language barriers and limited social mobility too. The Chinese were also officially banned from immigration to the U.S. for at least 10 years, starting in 1882 with the passing of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first U.S. federal law to ban immigration based on race or nationality. This act also banned Chinese immigrants already in the U.S. from becoming U.S. citizens. Although this act officially lasted only 10 years, it wasn't officially repealed until 1943. On top of legislation like this, Chinese immigrants also had to face mob violence, beatings, and murders. Dozens of anti-Chinese riots occurred, like the Rock Springs Massacre of 1885 in Wyoming. Eastern Europeans also faced discrimination when they immigrated to the U.S. in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The discrimination they faced was very similar to the discrimination we saw with the other ethnic groups. Like they were often not seen as fully white and viewed as backward, dirty, or unfit for American society. Jewish immigrants especially faced anti-Semitic slurs, violence, and exclusion from schools, housing, and jobs. And similar to the Irish, Italians, and other groups, Eastern Europeans were often funneled into dangerous, low-paying factory, mine, and mill jobs, often with no protections or rights. Also, like many other immigrants, they were pressured to abandon their languages and customs and assimilate into Anglo-American norms. And schools and churches often shunned their traditions. They also had to contend with discriminatory legislation that was aimed at them, like the Immigration Act of 1924, which created quotas to severely limit Southern and Eastern European immigration, targeting Italians, Jews, and Slavs in particular. The topics we have covered so far provides a solid background about the history of immigration in early America and how the demographics of immigrants changed rapidly, and how with each new immigrant group that arrived the people that already lived in America viewed them with an air of suspicion, the same suspicion that their families probably had to contend with when they came to America. Which is really ironic if you ask me, and shows how quickly people are willing to forget the past and follow the masses when they realize they are no longer at the bottom of the totem pole. Without realizing that the American culture is a result of all these different immigrant groups coming together with their unique customs, which got mixed together in the American melting pot, resulting in our current American culture. There are many things that seem to be 100% American but actually originated in another country, but that is a conversation for another day. But to really understand how our current immigration situation reached the level of chaos, I believe we have to closely examine the past events and actions between the U.S. and the countries where the majority of the present-day immigrants come from to try to determine the reason why there are so many people from these countries are trying to immigrate. And also review the past dynamics of the relationship between these demographics and Americans, to try to understand how the current mindset towards these demographics developed. We will focus especially on the long and complex relationship between Mexico and Mexicans with the US and Americans, in the hope that people realize current tensions aren't new. But since I don't want this video to be too long, I will end it here and create a part 2 of this topic, which will cover all those points. But for now, thank you for taking the time to watch this and be on the lookout for part 2. And if this topic enticed you and you want to make sure you don't miss the next video, please consider subscribing. Thank you, and have a good day.